So much to talk about. Hang on just one second here. I'm just going to tilt this up just a little bit. Okay. Just to follow up on the last video, I know it caused some heartburn for some people, and it still does for me. But here's what I think we ought to consider. When our prophet gives us the identity of a child of God, a child of the covenant, a disciple of Christ, you see how all those are individual identities? They're for the individual. If you think of our rights in the United States of America and a lot of other countries, they're individual rights, or they should be. That's the concept. If we go to the temple and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint temple, those covenants are individual. The danger I see is the groupthink of this organization has rights, not the individual. We're all for individual rights. And maybe this is why the church could wrap its head around this bill of marriage, the gay marriage or whatever bill, is that gives the right to an individual to do what they want, right? It's not God's thing, but it's a thing. And it has to do with individual rights, so you can wrap your head around it. But you see the difference between an individual. So we have the gay choir, Gay Men's Choir, Washington, D.C., being invited into to perform at the visitor center at the Washington, D.C. Temple Visitor Center. And the problem with that is this identity is this group think. And so if an individual is of the alphabet and they're in a choir, I don't think anybody cares. But as soon as you make it a group thing, and that this group has to be accepted, or this group has rights, or this group is going to be influenced, no, everybody's an individual. And so we respect and love the individual, but we don't need to love and respect what a particular group stands for. And we're totally fine and justified in that, in my opinion. So that's what bothers me about it, this big group being identified. And not that the choir is a big group, but they promote the alphabet, and they're activists for the alphabet. So that's just kind of a follow-up. As I'm looking here, I'm going to get a little drink of my cardio miracle. I'll tell you, I've been batching it for going on probably 3 weeks. If I was a bachelor, which I have been for a few weeks now, Sue's down helping out in Texas. And I miss her dearly, but I'm glad she's there helping. But if I was a permanent bachelor, I would not be without Cardio Miracle. I'm telling you. Because, if for 30, 40 years, been relying on someone else to really focus on meals, and not that I don't help and all that, and I don't want to please don't tell me that I should be doing all the cooking and all that, or sharing it. Let's just say Sue and I have a working agreement, okay? And I don't know if any of you have watched the reruns of According to Jim. Oh gosh, great show, great comedy. But anyway, if you're not used to being, focused on food, I mean, obviously for a week or so, no problem. But as time goes on, become less and less concerned about food. And then I think the next stage, if this continues, is I see myself really getting more focused and learning more how to do it. I'm pretty good at breakfast foods, bacon, eggs, and hash browns, or pancakes, or whatever. And lunches are pretty simple, right? But dinners, I just don't have it in me. And so my point with Cardio Miracle is if you're a single person, whether you're a seasoned cook that you've cooked all your life and you know how to cook, but you're on your own, or if you're a bachelor that typically hasn't done that. Not that all bachelors, look, I'm not stereotyping. I'm just saying in my particular situation, I haven't worried much on preparing, meals, especially for families or whatnot. But there's so much goodness in this. And I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not making any medical claims, but I'm just saying for me personally, this seems to make up a lot of differences in the mistakes I've made in my eating choices, let's say. So Cardio Miracle, give it a shot. I'll leave the link to if you're interested in getting a discount in it. But those of you that have tried it, I've loved hearing your stories. It's really been amazing. And that evening that some of us had in watching The Chosen and provided to us by the Hewletts, of that wonderful evening, watching The Chosen, talking about the blessing that Cardio Miracle's been in our lives. It was truly an amazing night. And seeing so many of you there was so touching. I'm still kind of speechless about it. I have never quite experienced anything like that. It was really something. So hopefully we'll continue down that path and be able to continue to enjoy this. I know sometimes the taste doesn't work for you or something like that. And, that's just the way life is. I don't know what to tell you. There's some things I can't stand mayonnaise. Mayonnaise. Not a fan. Not a fan of sour cream. Not a fan. So I get that there's certain tastes or things that you just can't do. I get that. But for me, I feel blessed that I have that. And so give it a shot. It's amazing. The nitric oxide, the spark of life, it really is something. So I told you I had to have some things like nuked, and I look pretty rough. I know that, but I probably look pretty rough anyway. But the skin doctor was great. He goes, you know what? There's nothing serious. This is all just preventative. And he said, you're 65. He said, we do a few things like this, then you get to 85. And if we didn't do anything, then there could be some problems. But yeah. So every once in a while, I go in and have some things checked. The summers when I was young, man, especially guiding river trips, it was full on. I told you that. A little bit of zinc oxide on the nose and we were good to go. and I had hair back then and, things have changed. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Zechariah, but I want to read this poem. So when we lived in Park City years and years and years ago, there was a couple that moved into our ward and stake. they are and they were the best of the best. Eileen and Hal, I probably shouldn't give their last names, but Hal passed away years ago, but Eileen is still living in Montana and just the salt of the earth. These were the best people, the best people. And Eileen and well, when Hal was here with us, he was just one of my heroes. A humble man from Montana, and a man of the land, and worked it, and there had to be a change, and so he found sold the farm and found some employment in the Park City area and in the mountains that kind of reminded him of Shoto, Montana, and that's where they put roots down. And now Eileen's back in Montana, family all over the place, a lot of them in Texas. And I don't know if any of you are listening and know who I'm talking about. Might be your mom or grandma or great-grandma, but I think the world of them. But she sends us a Christmas card. We exchange, Christmas messages every year. This particular one really, really touched me the other night. I want to read. So she tells all the, where everybody's living and all the things that are going on, and that she can't go visit much anymore. She has to rely on them visiting her. But here it is. This is a story I'll tell. 'Twas the night before our Savior came. 'Twas the night before our Savior came, and all through the house, not a person was praying, not one in the house. Their scriptures were laying on the shelf without care, thinking that our Savior would not come there. The children were dressing to crawl into bed, not once ever kneeling or bowing a head. And Mom in her rocker with baby on her lap was watching the late show while I took a nap. When out of the east there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my feet to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. When what to my wondering eyes should appear, but angels proclaiming that our Savior was here. With the light that the sun sending forth a bright ray, I knew in a moment it must be the day. The light of his face made me cover my head. It was our Savior, returning just like he said. And though I possessed worldly wisdom and wealth, I cried when I saw him in spite of myself. In the book of life, which he held in his hand, was written the name of every saved man. He spoke not a word as he searched for my name, then said, "It's not here." And my head hung in shame. The peoples whose names had been written with love gathered to take to his Father above. With those who were ready, he rose without a sound, while all the rest were left standing around. I fell to my knees, but it was too late. I had waited too long, thus sealed my fate. I stood and I cried as they rose out of sight. Oh, if only I'd been ready tonight. And then Eileen writes this. I love this. She goes, "Hope you enjoyed the story." It's so enjoy. I have some things to work on before I can enjoy it, Eileen. We all need to be ready for our Savior to come. This is Eileen writing this. May you all have a wonderful holiday season with family and friends. Once more, Merry Christmas, and may the new year bring you peace, love, and joy. That was so powerful, and it's interesting the focus that many of us have on the second coming of Christ. And here's Eileen. I don't know how old she is, but she's getting up there in years. And her focus for the Christmas message was the second coming of the Savior. Joy to the World is a second coming song. Let earth receive her king, right? So there's that. It's awesome. Okay. I'm going to put a link, in addition to the cardio miracle. I'll put a link in the comments. I'll pin it so it's the first comment, but of a video that was done by our tour leader in Israel. I think I've linked a couple of his videos, but this one was from our trip. And it's so cool because it's the tomb of the prophets, and the prophets are Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Pretty compelling evidence that their tombs were on the Mount of Olives, and we actually got to go in the tombs. The video will show it. It's pretty fascinating. An Arab family has owned the site in the area of that on the Mount of Olives, and it's private, so it's not on the regular tours. And you go down in, and there's it's pretty you can feel something there. I'll say that. Whether it's the actual tombs is probably not certain, but pretty good evidence that it was the tomb of those prophets that lived, in the 500 BC era, Malachi a little bit later, and many of their followers. This is a giant tomb, and it's all hand hewn right in the Mount of Olives. It's pretty massive cave complex, but not a natural cave. And with the prophecies of Zechariah in particular, of Christ on the Mount of Olives, you could see where this is where he would want to be buried. And many tombs around on the Mount of Olives, and as well as down the Kidron Valley and up on the other side towards the Temple Mount. But having been there and then reading these verses and these chapters of these last prophets of the Old Testament, there's just a connection. There's just a connection that's hard to describe. You can visualize them prophesying in these cities, and this is 400 plus years before the Savior comes. And I bought a book a while back at Deseret Book, and it's really, really interesting. It's called the Lost 500 Years. So these are the years after Malachi and before, and to Christ. And what really happened? We don't have a lot of information. We have some, but this has really been a fascinating book. There, and you can see the picture of the temple, and yeah, Deseret Book. I don't know when it was printed, but I've read it. It's really good. A lot of the information we get comes from Josephus. It also comes from the Apocrypha, because there we have Ezra, which was right at that time. So this is interesting how we have Ezra and Nehemiah at the same time period as Haggai and Zechariah. This temple, where is it Darius who came after Cyrus, and they're allowing from Persia, they're allowing the Jews to return and to build their temple. This is that time period. So it's interesting that we have this out of chronology, and these prophets apply to back here, and you kind of have to get it all in your head and figure out the time frame. But the temple is always the focal point. It's always the focal point. And I often wondered if this isn't on purpose, that we have this mixture, because you can focus on the temple here and then go through a few books, and then these guys can focus on the temple as well. And then we have the New Testament that's continually focused on the temple. Christ being taken to the temple as a babe, right, to be blessed. Christ coming back to the temple as a probably 12-year-old boy, right? And then Christ coming back to the temple as an adult, his ministry and teaching and healing, and then his triumphal entry as prophesied by Zechariah on the donkey on Passover. And then the apostles continuing to teach from the temple, and from the temple you'll be endowed with power. You see how the temple is the focal point. I highly recommend the YouTube channel from the Temple Institute. The guy does a reading. It's amazing, but the focus on the temple, it's just so critical. And I can't verify this. I might have mentioned this before, but someone who was in our I can't remember if Sunday school or priesthood, but he works for the church. But he said there were more temples, I think, built or remodeled than there were chapels in the last several months or a year or something like that. Be interesting to see if we could find out if that's actually true. But if it is, I think that's a fulfillment of prophecy, and a fulfillment of, maybe not a fulfillment, but a real sign of the Savior coming soon. We just don't have a lot of information about chapels, but we have a lot of information about temples. In Zechariah 8, I'm going to give a shout out to Unshaken YouTube channel, Brother Halverson. Man, powerful stuff he taught in there, powerful stuff. But chapter 8 really touched me. In verse 3, thus saith the Lord, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Now, I know we focus a lot on the latter day, the Gentile church, I call it, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the time of the Gentile, when we have our opportunity. And in all reality, we're Israel because of Joseph, because of Ephraim, and many of us are the arrows in the quiver to be shot forth to share the gospel. But it always goes back to Jerusalem and the country of Israel. It always goes back there. And we can look at Salt Lake or Jackson County or Davies County. We can look at those places as types. But Zion and the mountain of the Lord's house, the overreaching meaning is Jerusalem. It's Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and where the temple will be built, in my opinion. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I'm in verse 4 now of chapter 8. There shall yet old men and old women dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and every man with his staff in his hand for very age. Meaning, I I got to hobble around. And Unshaken really did a cool imagery on this. Let me read the next verse. And the streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets thereof. I've seen that prophecy fulfilled. I've seen it fulfilled for myself. Not this last time, but the time before in Israel, Jesse and I, my son, we stayed in the Jewish quarter of the old city in an Airbnb, and we saw this. You know, the streets are very narrow, and no auto. There might be a motorcycle or a scooter go through there, but no cars. A truck. Very, very tight quarters, things winding around. We saw kids playing soccer in there with their yarmulkes on and their clothing, and they were in the streets going in and out of different apartments and rooms. You know, they all knew each other, and it was so wonderful. And then we saw elderly individuals, and what Unshaken said was that these represent the most vulnerable, the old and the young. The very old and the very young, and they're safe. They're safe, and for the most part in Jerusalem, they're safe, and they're returning, and they're playing in the streets. The kids are. We saw it, and it was interesting because I wrote in my scriptures. Jesse and I saw this right when we got back. I didn't take these big scriptures, but I made a note, and when we were there, I said, "Look at this! Look at this!" This is fulfillment of prophecy, because I remembered that prophecy of Zechariah. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, if it be marvelous in the eyes of the remnant of this people in these days, should it also be marvelous in mine eyes, saith the Lord of hosts. These are his people. This is where the covenant was made. And all the world will be blessed through that covenant. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will save my people from the east country and from the west country, and I will bring them, and they shall dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Guys, this is Jerusalem. This is not a metaphor. This is Jerusalem. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God in truth and in righteousness. This is so powerful, and the blessings are so great. And then in chapter 9, we have the triumphal entry. The king cometh unto thee. This is verse 9 in chapter 9. The king cometh unto thee. He is just, having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. This is his triumphal entry. You could also look at it as Mary riding into Bethlehem through Jerusalem. And then in a sense, that was a triumphal entry as well, as a babe in the womb. So many meanings. And then if we read about his account in the Gospels, or about the account of Christ's triumphal entry on Passover, they refer to this prophecy, saying it's been fulfilled. And that's why I say, quite often we think of when Christ says, I haven't come to abolish or do away, or what's the word? I haven't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. The law, he's the law. He's come to fulfill the prophecies about the law, not to destroy those prophecies. That's how I look at it. I don't look at it as the law of Moses in a way, because those laws pointed towards the Savior. But Christ came to fulfill every prophecy about himself down to we've already gone through the 30 pieces of silver, all those things, and the potter's field. Oh no, maybe we haven't. No, that's in chapter 11. Sorry, that's in chapter 11. And the Lord said unto me, cast it unto the potter, a goodly price that I was prized at of them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. Very interesting. The Messiah being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Everything was fulfillment of prophecy. And, sometimes they knew it and sometimes they didn't. They didn't know they were fulfilling prophecy, right? Powerful. Zechariah is probably one of my favorite books of the Old Testament. There's just so many prophecies about Christ. Chapter 14, and I'm skipping so many good things, but let me go back to chapter 12 real quick. Verse 10, and I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So this is specific again about Jerusalem. The spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him, as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him, as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. Wow. I can't even imagine, this is 400 plus 500 years before Christ and before his birth. And Zechariah is having these very, very specific prophecies about him, about the Savior. In chapter 13, verse 8, and it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver, as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people. And they shall say, the Lord is my God. Chapter 14, verse 2. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Wow. And we've talked about this. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Excuse me. Now, some might say, well, that already happened at 70 AD. But this is specific about the last days. This is specific about his second coming. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. Our tour leader on this last trip, Todd Fink, he said, when Christ comes, there really isn't a battle. The battle will be before, Armageddon and all that, because that's men against men and all kinds of things going on. But when the Lord comes, there's really no battle. Well, he brings legions, and they will... There's no battle. It's over. Okay. And his feet shall stand on that day on the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem, on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof, towards the east and towards the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain will remove towards the north, and half towards the south. And this is, we've stood on the Mount of Olives. This is also the Mount of Olives is where Christ ascended from his apostles. It's such a critical place in all this second coming, and Jerusalem and the temple. It's all focused on the temple. And ye shall, I'm in verse 5 of 14, and ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, For the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee, like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. I want to be one of those. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. And it shall be in the day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them towards the former sea, and half of them towards the hinder sea, in the summer and winter, and in winter shall it be. It's very poetic. And we read about Ezekiel and the waters coming forth from the temple. So wonderful, wonderful things prophesied in Zechariah. And how fitting would it be if his tomb was actually, in that area. So we'll talk more about Malachi, obviously, but this time period between these last three prophets and the Savior, the Apocrypha. Okay, so you can order this from the KJV store, the King James Version. Just Google it, www.kjv.com probably. And these aren't too expensive. And I think this is a leather. I think this is leather. I don't think it's fake. Anyway, it's the 1611 edition, and it includes the Apocrypha. It's a little difficult to read, but it is the King James Version. The U's are V's and the V's are U's. And so sometimes you gotta, that gets a little tricky, at least it does for me. But the Maccabees and Ezra and that time period is in there. Now, we know what Joseph Smith, he asked, and we have that in the Doctrine and Covenants about the Apocrypha, and it can be very good. You just have to be inspired when you're reading it and see if you can get. But if you include the Apocrypha, Josephus, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls, another big resource, because that a lot of that came from the time before Christ, and then somewhat after. But to have basically all the books except Esther that came to us in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and to have other books that came, we can get an understanding. But my overall, after reading some of this, my overall feeling about why we don't have a ton of information and no prophets is, at least that we have record of. I suspect there were holy men and women that had visions and understanding. We just don't have them. But there was a lot of turnover of empires during that time. And it came pretty in rapid fashion until the Romans took over prior to Christ coming. So I think that's one reason. It was just one rollover after another. Now, this gets a little controversial, but the Arabs, Muslims, they'll say that the Jews there's no evidence of any Jewish presence at the time of Christ, after Christ, before Christ, and the archaeological evidence is overwhelming that that's not the case. But they'll maintain that until today. And if there's anything found, especially in what the world calls the West Bank, they'll cover it up. They'll cover up that evidence. But there's synagogues. There's all kinds of Hebrew writing that we know that the Jews and Israel had a presence in all of Israel. David, going way, way back. Joshua, as they entered back in. There's even an altar in the city of David that there's very good indication that it was an altar of Melchizedek, where Jerusalem was called Salem, Jerusalem. It was just Salem, right? So that puts us at the time of Abraham. We know that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, Temple Mount, and to see in Magdala, in Galilee, to see a synagogue that dates at the time of Christ because of all the things they found. It's there. You can even go to the Golan Heights, and they have found excavated synagogues in the Golan Heights. So there you have it. So there's some resources. The Apocrypha, which is in the 1611 edition, you can get it elsewhere. I found this to be a fascinating book that describes this time period. And then also, I have another book here that I use as a resource. Sorry, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's a lot of crazy stuff in here, but I like it. And it's a very thick book, and it has the Book of Enoch and all that kind of stuff. But we can get a bit of an understanding of what happened in that time period. But then once Christ comes to the scene, we still have the temple. The temple's the focal point still. John has the priesthood through his father. Zachariah, right? Not Zechariah, but Zachariah, I think. Zacharias. And then you have inspired people at the temple that recognize, I've seen the Messiah now, priests and women that have been praying to see the Messiah. When they see baby Jesus, they know. So it wasn't lost, is my point. It wasn't lost. And inspiration continued. We just don't have a great record or much of a record at all of that time period. So it's pretty fascinating to think about. And maybe there needed to be this nothing period in preparation for the Messiah to come and to be born and to be raised and to come from Nazareth and to fulfill every jot and tittle of prophecy about him. And we needed that kind of dead space so that we could focus on that event. Perhaps. I don't know. I don't know the reason. But anyway, it's a great study this year that we've had in the Old Testament. And this isn't a Come Follow Me channel, but it's hard to not talk about the things that we read on a weekly basis as a church. Now, one last thing I want to say. Because I mentioned this thing in Washington, D.C., I get a lot of accusations that I'm speaking evil of the brethren and speaking evil of the church as a whole, and it's just not the case. Because I see something that I don't feel comfortable with, what are we so dogmatic and so what's the word I'm looking for? Robotic, that we can't voice any kind of an opinion. That's just not healthy. It's just not healthy. I love the church. I love it. I love the conduit that it provides to have these priesthood keys that have been restored work through. I love the brethren. The responsibility that they have is immense. I sustain them fully. I love the Book of Mormon. It's like, it's our gift. It's like our proof that the restoration took place. I've said this many times before, but I feel like the Book of Mormon is the evidence of the restoration, and the Doctrine and Covenants is the evidence of this dispensation, and that Joseph is the prophet of the last dispensation. And so these things are just a huge blessing. But to equate or to have that and then say, you should never say anything that even if you feel uncomfortable, you should just keep your mouth shut. I don't have that in my being to do that. And so if I see something I feel uncomfortable about, it's not an indictment on my testimony of the restored gospel. I don't understand that thinking that you just have to lock, stock, and barrel. So lock, the stock, and the barrel, that's the whole gun. Everything has to be in line, or you're not supportive of the church. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. What kind of organization do we want to belong to if we can't say, you know what, and then still be in full fellowship? That's healthy. That's healthy. What's not healthy is go, oh, I have these thoughts, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to appear to be going against anything. Good night, folks. Jesus is the one that makes no mistakes. Jesus is the one that can redeem me. Jesus is the one that can fix all the problems. And he's it. He's the only one. So in that case, yeah, we're all in. But everything else is like, you know what? I'm a little frustrated with this. I don't quite get this. That's wrong? I don't think so. I just don't think so. It doesn't mean you don't sustain and support and love and care and belong. See, here's the problem. As soon as you say, it's like this. Remember this? Hey, if you didn't do that, you're not part of the club anymore because you didn't follow the prophet. What? What? You just like that? Boom. That makes no sense to me. That makes no sense to me. Or, the idea of people in my generation that dealt with a lot of things that have changed, and you know, concerning the priesthood, concerning marriage, multiple, you know, polygamy and all that. Not that I lived through that, but you know, had people that I knew. That's how young this is, right? That's how young this is. My dad died at 94, and you know what? He lived knowing people that were part of that, you know, raised up generation to have multiple wives and whatnot. And it was fresh. And then you know, you question or you wonder, and you were still obedient and still a member of the church, but you just kind of wondered. My generation was the priesthood situation. I was on my mission when that announcement came that everybody could enjoy the blessings of the temple. that's really the way I look at it. I don't really look at it as a priesthood thing, because women aren't bestowed the priesthood, and yet, certain women weren't allowed to go to the temple, and even though they didn't have the priesthood. So I look at it more inclusive than just, every worthy male, can go, to have the priesthood. This was a temple thing for me, right? That's why. So you wonder and you think, but you're not going out and starting a new church or leaving, the church, and you're waiting and praying. Boom, happens. So questioning and wondering, there's nothing wrong with that. And I bring up questions. Why would we have this choir and support and validate not individuals, but an organization? Just it should never be, in my opinion. So anyway, I've restated this so many times that I'm not here to cause grief or to separate myself from the church or the brethren. Just the opposite. Just the opposite. And what my hope is that people that are feeling a bit frustrated like me, that we can work with each other to stay in the good ship Zion and not get so frustrated that we leave. Because you leave, it's not leaving a church, it's leaving a covenant, an individual covenant with God. That's what we don't want to do. And there's no reason to. Just because there's things that just don't quite fit. The expression, don't throw the baby out, the baby being the covenant, with the bathwater. You just don't do that. The baby is the most important thing. Our covenants with God through his restored priesthood are the most important thing. And we don't lose sight of that. But to just sit on our hands, silence our mouths, and march, that's not God's plan, in my opinion. Ask questions. Try to figure things out. What the heck is going on? It's total a sign of the times for me. It's exciting to me. Disappointing, frustrating, but overall exciting, because to me, it's all a sign of the times. It's all a sign of the times. When things like that happen, where you have an identified gay men's choir singing at a visitor center dedicated building, that's a sign of the times, folks. Sign of the times. And we should be excited about that, because that means Jesus is this much closer to coming. So, all right. Rambled and rambled. God bless you all. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.